last week, I recorded myself, but I forgot to change over the microphone, and so I had visual, but I had no audio. So then I didn't have anything to post to YouTube, which was disappointing. So look at how pretty this book is. You see that? I love pretty books. I love books in general, but pretty books are definitely one of my favorite. So we're going to start this evening off with A Telltale Heart. It's one of the first pieces of Edgar Allan Poe that I ever read when I was in my youth, way back in the day. So that's where we're going to start. And then we'll just go from there and see what happens. Here we go. A Telltale Heart. Look at how pretty that is. Ah, I'm a sucker for a pretty book. So, also I guess I should introduce myself. Hi, my name is Ravven. For those of you who are watching this later on our YouTube channel page, Nights with Ebon Pinion, I am the author of I Am Ravven and The Cry of the Raven, an upcoming novel, Sentimental Dead, that comes out this October. And I'm also the founder of Curious Corvid Publishing. Yes, I have a lot going on. No, I am not sane. I do Spoops with Ravven every other Friday night at 8 p.m. just to read scary stories, hang out, and maybe do a little magic too. So I have an affinity for the darker things of life. I'm sure you couldn't tell by looking at me, and just wanted to share it with like-minded people. So, shall we? The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am, but why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously. Cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through the fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing on it steadily, steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh, no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew this sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It's only a mouse crossing the floor," or "It is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death in approaching him had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, though he never saw or heard, but to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a simple, dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct precisely on that damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the sense? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once, and once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heartbeat went on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. For first, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught it all. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what am I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. A suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. For what have I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search, and search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed him his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them to rest here from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat, and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became louder. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained momentum, until at length I found the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men. But the noise steadily increased. God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew. And they were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now, again, hark, louder and louder and louder and louder. Villains, I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here, it is the beating of his hideous heart. That's still one of my absolute favorite stories. I love reading that one, and it's relatively easy to read too. I kind of get into it a little bit. But yeah, it is one of my favorite pieces. I feel like that's probably like one of the ones that everybody knows by Edgar Allan Poe. Like everybody knows that one, but it's still one of my favorites. These pages are stuck together a little bit from the gold around the edges. This is the first time I've like actually read out of the book, besides just admiring it, so it's actually getting used this evening. Right. I think we have time for probably one more story. I think we could probably do, let's see. I hope everyone's having like a good time. If you would like to talk or make comments in the chat, you can do so. If you hover on Nights with Ebon Pinion, then click on the little chat bubble. You don't have to talk. I'm just making sure that you all know how to do that, if you would so choose to. So I obviously enjoy dark literature. I work with a lot of people who write dark literature, and so I'm going to be asking some of the people that I have had the pleasure of publishing if I can read some of their pieces on Spoops with Ravven, because I think it would be really fun. So keep an eye out for that in the future. We'll get some more modern literature in here as well. How about we read one of his poems? I wanted to be more put together. I was very put together last week. Last 2 weeks ago. Last 2 weeks ago, I was much more put together than I am this evening, but I'm trying. Okay, let's see. Why don't we read his other piece that everybody knows? 68. Did you know that much of Edgar Allan Poe's work is now in public domain? So is Frankenstein and Wuthering Heights, Phantom of the Opera. A lot of old Gothic literature is now in the public domain. Okay, here's the Ravven. I guess you all wouldn't be able to tell why I would like this one so much. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this and nothing more." Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. So that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. That it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more." Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token. And the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon I heard again a tapping somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not an instant stopped or stayed he, but with the mien of lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "are sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. that the raven sitting lonely on the placid bust spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before, on the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." Then the bird said, "Nevermore." Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, "Doubtless," said I, "that it utters as its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of never, nevermore." But the raven still beguiling all my sad soul into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking with this ominous bird of yore, with this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore, meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by angels whose faint footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. "Wretch," I cried, "thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff this kind of nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." "Prophet," said I, "thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." "Prophet," said I, "thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul, with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." "Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend," I shrieked, upstarting, "get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take my form off my door." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on that pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. And that's The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. In this beautiful book that I have. So shiny. I hope you guys enjoyed my reading of Edgar Allan Poe. Tonight we'll do some more H.P. Lovecraft, and because I love H.P. Lovecraft. I will also start reading some pieces from my upcoming novel, The Sentimental Dead, which drops in October. We also have a really exciting project coming from Curious Corvid called the Corvid Grimoire, and it features beautifully delicious dark stories from each of the Curious Corvids, and I will be reading my story here one of these nights, and possibly some other pieces too if I have the author's permission. So, something to look out for. But before we go, let's do something fun. So I identify as a chaos witch. Chaos witch is somebody who has lots of... so a chaos witch is basically all about education. We learn about different practices, different theologies, different religions, and we take things from a little bit of everywhere to broaden our horizons. And as long as it's not a closed practice, which you should respect. So before you do any kind of witchcraft, make sure that you're educating yourself on what is a safe practice for you to be engaging with, and also make sure it's not a closed practice, because that's just disrespectful. Some things aren't meant for us, and that's okay. But one thing I really enjoy is tarot and oracle, and I naturally have a crow tarot and matching oracle deck. So I have the oracle deck here with me right now, and it's one of my favorite things ever in the world. So last week I did a card pull, and I think that the card was confidence. I think so. I think last week I used this is my Enchanted Blossom deck. It's very vintage, and I love it, and it's flowers and dragons, and each one corresponds to like a special theme. So like this one is tranquility. So I think I did that one last week, and I pulled the confidence card, and I think it was that we needed to work on our confidence, but I can't actually remember, and I deleted the recording because it didn't have sound, so I can't go back and find out. It's okay. I did make sure to record this one, and it will have sound. I'm so smart. I just got done reading some Edgar Allan Poe, and I'm going to pull some oracle cards. So, anyway, sound is really good. Sound is important. So, all right. So, anyway, what was I saying? I lost my train of thought. Okay. So, I'm going to shuffle these cards, and I'm just going to ask for some insight. Oh, hello. Go. This one just popped out on its own. So usually I will shuffle the cards with something in my brain, and I ask for what's something I should focus on, or what's something that is upcoming, or something that I should look out for. So for tonight, I was going to ask what's something we should focus on over these next 2 weeks until we see each other again. And I already had one pull out. I already had one pop out. So we're just going to shuffle it for a couple more times. Focus on Leo season. I know. I'm excited for Scorpio season. That's coming up. Scorpio season lines up perfectly with spooky season, that's my season. So it all comes together. Whoop. Okay. Ooh. Okay. Okay. All right. So I've done some readings for myself this week because I've had a lot on my brain and a lot to figure out. And the one thing that keeps coming up is communication, which I really struggle with communication because it's hard to talk about how you feel sometimes, and it's also just exhausting to deal with people. But guess what popped up is communication. So if you didn't know, Corvids have amazing communication. They have a whole system within their society where they talk with each other on the daily to make sure everybody's okay and everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. They also communicate and pass things down to their young, and if you ever piss a Corvid off, they'll remember you. They won't forget, and they'll tell their friends, family, and children about it. So that's something to keep in mind if you're ever out in the wild and you come across a crow or a raven or, one of those. So we have communication. The very first card that popped out was dreams. So we have this beautiful crow staring at that key in the sky, stars, and we have the moon, and everything is heads kind of in the clouds. So if there's a dream that you have been working towards, or that you're starting to lay the groundwork for, or maybe you've just been thinking about it and you're not really sure if you should go for it, this card is saying, yes, you should. Let's focus on our dreams these next 2 weeks and see what happens. We also have the betrayal card. So another thing that crows will do is they really look out for each other, and when there is an opportunity for food or something like that, scouts will go ahead to make sure that the area is safe and make sure that they can go get what they need to go get. And sometimes what they'll do is if there's competition in the area, they will lure the other birds into a false sense of security so that they can go get what they want. So we have betrayal, communication, and dreams. I think what the betrayal card is saying this week is that we often betray ourselves with our poor communication with other people and within ourselves, and because we often discount the dreams or goals that we have because we feel maybe they are really hard to attain, or they're just like, maybe they go against the grain of what it is that you know, or something along those lines. A lot of times we end up betraying ourselves. So as we go into these next 2 weeks until I see you again, focus on your dreams. Make active goals that you know that you are able to achieve. Be realistic. Don't betray yourself. And work on your communication. Make sure that you're saying what you need and what you want, and that you're honest about who you are. I hate communication. Oh my God. Okay, no, we can't do all of these. Okay, so we did that one. So this is sounds like a lot of adulting. Feels bad, man. Just kidding. That is great advice. Thank you. I feel the same way. I did a tarot reading for myself earlier today because I have some opportunities coming up, and I've just been feeling really overwhelmed by life in general lately. So I just needed some clarity, and like one of the first cards was just be open about how you feel, and I was like, okay, but no. So but yeah, so thank you so much for hanging out with me this evening. Let's work on our communication skills, work towards achieving our dreams, and not betraying ourselves in the process. So next week, I think I'll be reading some of my own, not next week, in 2 weeks. When I see you again, I'm going to be reading some of the works that I have written, and I'll be sharing with you my short story that's going to be in the Corvid Grimoire. It's about a haunted apple orchard, and I'm really excited. And then coming up also, I will start reading you some chapters of The Sentimental Dead, which comes out in October, and I can't wait, and I hope that you can't wait either. So until I see you again, we may be different species, but we're all part of the same family. So please be kind to yourself and be kind to others, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.